Hey everybody, welcome to
Hello.
Pop's React, your BP1 and BP2.
Here we are.
Back
in focus.
with Simon Whistler.
Yes.
At Mega Projects with Mount Weather. The
Okay.
US government's emergency hideout. So obviously we've just done the bunker.
Mount Cheyenne.
So yeah, this is Mount Weather. Mount Weather, don't know about that. Why are we doing it?
We're doing it because
You know
of the yes. Amanda, she's got a bit of a trio going on here. So we've gone Mount Cheyenne, Mount Weather, and another one coming soon. Is this the one where I don't know? Let's let Simon do it because he does a good job. To be fair, does a lot of research.
Very informative. Very informative. So
this is going to be a good one. So let's see where Mount Weather is. Any idea?
I haven't got a clue, mate.
No. Don't know this one.
Somebody's finally done it. After months of saber-rattling. It's 2044, and somebody's finally done it. After months of saber-rattling, weeks of deployments of elite cybernetic soldiers to the front lines, and days of breathless speculation as one side or another comes close to the brink, somebody, somewhere, hit the big red button, and now the whole world is about to change very quickly. In Washington, D.C., panic rises, the social order breaks down, and before long, the city devolves into pandemonium. There could be just minutes, just mere moments before apocalypse hits, and when humanity is faced with its sudden final crescendo, hardly anybody knows how to respond, except for them. Across the city, motorcades of black SUVs and the occasional armored limousine dart through the landscape, traveling at breakneck speed, with little regard for what stands in their way. They aren't panicked. They're focused. They have a destination. And if this truly is the end of how things used to be, then nothing is more important now than getting them to their destination. If apocalypse has struck, then they're headed for Mount Weather, where the US government goes to survive.
Okay, so this is obviously in Washington.
Good intro.
DC.
Yeah, hope so.
Otherwise, it's a long way to go.
Yeah.
Today's video is brought to you by the one and the only Manscaped.com, the ultimate destination.
Right,
for all
we're going to
things grooming
skip
and
his.
hygiene. Over 10
A river.
We'll
Take a
skip
trip
his
out from
Manscaped.
Washington,
Get your
D.C. to
Manscaped.
Appalachia, where the winding Shenandoah River cuts through the low valleys, and you may or may not find something you personally consider to be almost heaven. But ask again when a Category 5 hurricane bears down on the city, when a massive terror attack devastates the capital, or when the world is on the brink of nuclear war, and this little stretch of the Blue Ridge Mountains starts to look like the best place on Earth. Sitting partway down State Route 601, not far from the towns of Purcellville and Berryville, you'll find a facility called the Mount Weather Emergency Operations Center, also known as the High Point Special Facility. In its primary role, it's home to a control station for FEMA, the Federal Emergency Management Agency. They're the people who take over in the United States in the event of a major natural disaster or other large-scale catastrophe. At Mount Weather, FEMA operates a high-frequency radio system where most public safety agencies in the US, plus the US military, are able to cross-communicate with the leadership of most of America's states, which already is a pretty impressive feat by itself. But Mount Weather also serves a dual purpose, one that is, most of the time, functionally dormant. FEMA's control station occupies the majority of a 200,000 square foot multiple building facility at ground level, sprawled across a site totaling 434 acres. But underground, the facility is much, much bigger. What exactly it looks like below the surface is unknown, and we'll get into why that is in just a moment. But what we do know, according to America's Center for Land Use Interpretation, is that Mount Weather's underground facilities include somewhere between 600,000 and 700,000 square feet of underground space. According to them, that space comprises, quote, the main relocation sites for the highest level civilian and military officials, and what is called, seemingly interchangeably, the continuity of government and the continuity of operations plan. Put in simple terms, Mount Weather is where the who's who of America's essential personnel will end.
Your name's not on the list.
Hell breaks loose at a moment's notice. The President, the Joint Chiefs of Staff, and all of America's top-level officials, who the country absolutely cannot function without, will be making the trip to the Blue Ridge Mountains very quickly should they ever need to. Now, the site wasn't always meant to be a secret Armageddon bunker. When it was first built, it belonged to the National Weather Bureau, where it was used for a few relatively idle years to launch balloons and kites. From that rather humdrum work, it would pass into the control of the Bureau of Mines in 1936 to play a role that was equally unlikely to get anybody particularly interested, specifically to be a testbed for new mining techniques, which the government would use to borrow just long enough that they could confirm the techniques worked, and then sign a bit of paperwork to authorize its use. During World War II, the site didn't play much of a role at all, just functioning as the host spot for a civilian public service facility for conscientious objectors who had been drafted but were unwilling to work on the front lines. Known in those years as Camp 144, the site passed through the wartime years with all the relative obsolescence that it had done in the decades prior. But that all changed in 1954, during the early years of the Cold War, while humanity was still waking up to the sheer scope of the nightmare that was mutually assured destruction. For those of our viewers who are a bit less nuclear inclined, we'll summarize briefly here. America had a lot of nuclear weapons and planned on getting a whole lot more. The Soviet Union also had a lot of nuclear weapons and planned on getting lots more as well. The Americans and the Soviets really didn't like each other, and both sides feared that the other would declare war, so they basically vowed that if nuclear weapons were used against them, they'd also use nuclear weapons in return. It's the strategic equivalent: if I'm going down, you're coming down with me. What that meant for the US government around this time was that planners and strategists now had to start thinking about the moment after the end of the world. Once nuclear weapons were well on their way to devastate the global population, what would America or anyone else do in the aftermath? After all, even at this time, there were a few people convinced that the entire US population would be wiped out. There would be a broken civilization left in the aftermath, and amidst the fallout, there would have to be some degree of American government that remained. And if the Soviets were really so intent on conquering the world, as many American political leaders believed, then there would have to be people after the apocalypse who could leverage what remained of the military and defend the United States from a prospective Soviet invasion. The answer was to build a bunker, an impenetrable underground behemoth that could get a nuclear bomb dropped on top of it and still be just fine underneath. And fortunately for the US government, they knew from their prior mining operations that the bedrock under Mount Weather was actually pretty ideal. In 1954, the Bureau of Mines began construction on a facility codenamed Operation High Point, with the Army Corps of Engineers eventually taking over. The project, which racked up costs of over $1 billion when adjusted for today's inflation, consisted of the construction of a maze of tunnels and atrium points with roofs that are reinforced with a total of about 21,000 iron bolts. Those bolts each drive 8 to 10 feet into the bedrock above, making them exceptionally sturdy. The entrance, secured behind a guillotine gate, comprised a massive blast door, 10 feet tall, 20 feet wide, 5 feet thick, and 34 tons. Back in those days, it took a full 10 to 15 minutes to open or close it, although any updates since are as yet unknown.
15 to 20 minutes to
open that door, would you? I've got a couple of coffees here for you.
Probably much of a surprise for a facility this secretive that the innards of Mount Weather are basically unknown. Their modern updates especially are way outside the realm of public knowledge, and fair enough. Not only are the specifics of Mount Weather of ultimate importance to ensure America's survival, but even the country's own population will be far too busy dealing with swirling clouds of radiation to even think about Mount Weather in the event that it would have to serve its ultimate purpose. That being said, we do know at least some of what's inside. The facility is said to include both a hospital and a crematorium, both of which are critical to maintaining health and hygienic conditions in a closed space built for long-term survival. To that same end, it includes a sewage treatment plant on site. It includes areas for dining and recreation, ample sleeping quarters, a radio and television studio that's able to function via America's emergency broadcasting system, a range of office buildings, and reserve systems to provide water and electricity. According to publicintelligence.net, the site also includes a, quote, computer complex for directing emergency simulations and operations throughout the Contingency Impact Analysis System, SIAS, and the Resource Interruption Monitoring System, or RIMS. Both of those systems are meant to assist in large-scale emergency planning and disaster response. 2,000 sleeping cots are said to be present inside.
Let's take a breath for him.
Yes, or WTF, what the flips?
I mean...
Woo!
It's so informative. I mean, our little brains are just like...
it's just information overload now, isn't it?
But to be honest, again, it's one of those ones where you can't really appreciate it until you saw it, or you were to see it, or all the stuff that he's saying from hospitals, crematoriums, sewage works. It's basically a whole town built underneath a mountain, that if required, it's there. And it's sad, isn't it? It's really sad when you see like the missiles going across the world. As humans,
what we've sort of,
we live in fear. We push fear against each other all the time. Just it's just sad. And then from the outcome of that, the way it is.
Yeah, from the outcome of that, then you got to build things like this. It's cost billions of dollars just to keep a few people safe. From if you hadn't invented the first thing, you wouldn't need the second thing, isn't it?
Yeah.
Let's go back to throwing stones at each other. I think. But the information is thick and fast from Simon here. But you got to sort of let it digest a bit and just take it in. The sheer vast size of these places. I mean, you map that out in the UK, it'd probably take up half the UK, wouldn't it? I think.
Probably. Yeah.
Mad. All right.
It's crazy.
He likes an acronym, or they do.
You do, yeah. Okay, let's get back to it.
Although only the president, their cabinet members, and the Supreme Court are afforded private quarters to sleep. Whether that information remains accurate in the 2020s, we cannot say, but certainly space would be at a premium in any closed environment of this kind. Over the course of its history, Mount Weather has been partially activated a few times, but activated full scale only once. That was in 1965, when a major electrical blackout left some 30 million people without electricity for the better part of half a day when a transmission line failed near Niagara Falls and led to a cascading effect.
Half a day?
It had already been prepped to assume governmental powers after the 1-2 punch of the Cuban Missile Crisis and the assassination of JFK. In 1974, the previously secret facility was exposed to the public by accident when Trans World Airlines Flight 514 crashed on a wooded hillside near the facility, killing all 92 passengers and crew and inadvertently revealing the existence of the base. Said the Associated Press when announcing the crash, quote, "The plane impacted about 1.5 miles from an underground complex that reportedly is resigned to serve as a headquarters for high government officials in the event of nuclear war." Federal spokesperson would acknowledge only that the facility is operated by the little-known Office of Preparedness, whose responsibilities, he said, include continuity of government in time of national disaster. Then, quote, "The incident revealed Mount Weather's existence, not just to the American public, but most of US Congress as well, where even in hearings after the fact, top American military chiefs would refuse to provide detailed testimony on what exactly was going on inside Mount Weather. In the years since then, Mount Weather has been kicked into partial activity a few times, including during the 9/11 attacks in 2001, during which time the Washington Post reported that most congressional leaders have been evacuated there by helicopter. It was also the target of an apparent program by the National Gallery of Art from 1979 to 1981, which specified a mechanism for Mount Weather to receive and protect highly valuable paintings in the event of a global catastrophe that provided enough advance warning to make the transfer in time. Whether Van Gogh and Picasso will remain at the top of America's nuclear apocalypse priority list today, we have no idea. Further details about the inner working of Mount Weather are as yet still obscured from the public. The facility is a topic where leaks are exceptionally rare, and no one who's had the responsibility of working inside has ever come forward to offer testimony as to what's inside.
All the people that have worked there.
Inside, including a skeleton crew of somewhere between 75 to 100 workers, living and working inside the facility for rotations of up to several months. Per the Centre for Land Use Interpretation.
They might have like the death penalty or something. You know what I mean? It might be just completely mad if you are, at that, high level. Might just say
high level clearance to get in there, and if you sort of break that protocol, then you could be locked up for a long time. But again, just the amount of people that must have worked there, served there, and still hardly anything known about it. Interesting.
Those workers are briefed daily on security threats facing the nation, and it's on them to keep Mount Weather ready to switch into crisis mode and take over if the worst really does happen. Since 9/11, those workers are alleged to have maintained a constant state of readiness at the facility. Nor is Mount Weather the only facility of its kind, at least not across the United States. During the Cold War, America's contingency plan for a nuclear exchange involved not just one bunker, but 3. Mount Weather in Northern Virginia would account for the president, the leaders of Congress, the Supreme Court, the Joint Chiefs, and other, shall we say, Washington, D.C. people. Another bunker in the Blue Ridge Mountains, Raven Rock, is located near the line dividing Pennsylvania and Maryland, and it was intended to host the command and control elements of each branch of the U.S. military. Then, way out in Colorado, there was the Cheyenne Mountain Complex, headquartering the North American Aerospace Defense Command, or NORAD, the United States Northern Command, or U.S. Northcom, the U.S. Space Command, and a lot of other very important elements for America's continental defense. Cheyenne Mountain is built built to withstand a high-altitude electromagnetic pulse, or EMP, and survive the explosion of a 30-megaton nuclear warhead as close as 1.2 miles away. Together, those three complexes were, at one time, meant to be the heart of America's plan for continuity of government. It's unclear whether this trio still reflects America's plans for a modern-day national crisis, but Mount Weather, and whatever other facilities do still exist, will almost certainly be linked in some way in order to ensure that they can communicate with each other and coordinate a national plan of survival even after the rest of the country is dissolved. In its day-to-day operations, Mount Weather is still a rather active location. It hosts 6 major disaster operations facilities for FEMA, including, among others, the Disaster Finance Office, the Agency Logistics Center, and the Disaster Personnel Operations Division, all of which might sound quite innocuous, but end up being really rather important when it's time to save lives in the wake of a catastrophe. During FEMA's operations across the US, Mount Weather is often a decision-making nerve center and a conduit for support.
See, I always think of things like this. Now, obviously, we've got the nuclear war and everything else.
Yep.
The man-made stuff. But it's that one day there's going to be an asteroid that's going to hit Earth. You know,
yes.
But that's going to happen before the sun burns out, right? That's going to happen. So it's those sort of moments that how the planet survives, you know, and the mountains and the... Yeah, it really comes down to stuff like that. So for me, that's where something like this, when you've got personnel in those and there's a global catastrophe which could wipe out the human race.
Yep.
Yeah, to a degree, that we can still survive as humans after that. So, yeah, it'd be very interesting. Obviously, we want to blow the thing up before it hits us.
Well, yeah.
But we don't always get, you know, I think everyone sort of thinks that, you know, oh, in 2029 there's one that's coming close or something. But there are ones that come out of the blue that aren't far away, and you don't have a lot of time. We don't have a lot of time to go out and get them. So, yeah,
I mean, yeah, or you just put 6 miners on a spaceship and send them up there to blow it up. I mean, wonder if that's been thought of before. But yeah, no, and like I say, natural disasters is more that, yeah. Well, I mean, we've come close with the Cold War and things like that, but as I say, natural disasters would probably be the more common one, and you know, with the lesser sort of natural disasters, flooding in Mississippi and stuff like that, FEMA, I've often heard that FEMA are on the ground helping out, or FEMA have come in to take over.
Yeah.
So yes.
Ought to be remote across FEMA operations around the country. It also hosts a processing service center to help people who are impacted by major or minor disasters, getting survivors set up with the knowledge and resources they need to start on their way toward recovery. All the while, below the surface, that small advanced crew is still believed to work around the clock to keep Mount Weather ready, never knowing when what we can only assume is a bright red telephone is going to ring and announce that planet Earth is in its endgame.
We don't want that.
No.
So everything that we've discussed thus far about Mount Weather fits rather neatly into 2 categories: what we know and what we think we know. Now though, we can come to the 3rd category: what we can deduce about Mount Weather and the elements of contingency and crisis planning that almost certainly surround it. Of course, we'll be the first to admit that these sorts of speculation almost certainly won't hit 100% accuracy, but it is worth doing nonetheless, and painting at least a hazy picture of what this facility might be capable of if it ever does need to assume its ultimate role. Before we get into this last section, we do have to emphasize again that Mount Weather could also be used in the event of national disaster, terror attack, or other catastrophes that are, shall we say, survivable. But today, we're going to talk about the nuclear option. Most important here are the systems that would allow Mount Weather to survive a nuclear apocalypse. According to one 2023 analysis by MIT professor Max Tegmark, working with an interdisciplinary team to simulate a modern-day large-scale nuclear war, a nuclear apocalypse in the 2020s would see one side launching a strike and the other side launching a retaliation before the first wave even begins to impact, with US and Russian ballistic missiles ravaging each other's territory within minutes of the war's starting point. With those strikes would come massive electromagnetic pulses, frying the US power grid and any electronic devices that haven't been hardened to such EMPs. America's command and control systems and its nuclear launch facilities would likely be prime targets. With all that come 3 key priorities for Mount Weather: surviving the nuclear strikes themselves, conducting damage assessment to learn just how devastating an adversary strikes were, and just how much of America's defense apparatus is left, and keeping up communications with other secure bunkers and surviving assets elsewhere. As for how Mount Weather accomplishes those tasks, well, we suspect that's probably at the top of the list of things the people in charge of America's contingency plans would like to keep a secret. But what does seem likely is that the facility will be equipped with hardened electronics that can survive EMP blasts, as well as mechanisms to maintain continual communications with satellites for global surveillance. While known American military assets around the world are not likely to avoid nuclear attack, the Mount Weather facility may have a means to remain in contact with American ballistic missile submarines and operate the complex, highly involved systems necessary to relay messages to them under the sea. The complex may also have mechanisms to attempt to relay messages to the American public, as it's known to have had these in decades past, although how such messages would be transmitted after most public-issue electronics are fried is a bit of a mystery. It would host systems that would allow Mount Weather to communicate with allied nations or even adversaries, and it may have some mechanism to directly coordinate second-round strikes on an adversary, either using whatever nuclear weapons remain or by attacking elements like satellites that would give that adversary nation the same capabilities America has via Mount Weather and its broader network of bunkers. Finally, the complex is likely to have some sort of mechanism in place to deal with decontamination for people arriving at the bunker after they might have been exposed to radiation, an outcome that's altogether too likely given just how fast a nuclear exchange can happen. Equally important is the process of determining just who should get a ticket to Mount Weather if the worst does come to pass. While on the surface, that might seem like a relatively easy equation to solve. The more important you are, the higher a priority you become to get the call. But the real process just isn't that simple. Just as one example, most of the 535 members of US Congress are expected not to be chosen as survivors in Mount Weather, and even for those who are, most of their aides aren't likely to be brought along. The reason for this is rather simple.
Scientists.
While a given person might be America's brightest mind when it comes to, let's say, the intricacies of the social security system, which is itself a quarter of America's entire peacetime spending, that person's immense knowledge and expertise are irrelevant in the case that America's leadership needs to survive inside a bunker. Far more important would be taking the cot, water, and food reserves that might have gone to that social security expert and giving them to, say, a communications officer who doesn't know nearly as much but can keep the Mount Weather facility in communication with the US government's other critical bunkers across the country. The president's press secretary is probably being left behind to face the nuclear apocalypse, while the national security advisor and the chief of staff might each get to bring a handful of aides along. Mount Weather does have a press room and the capability to host journalists, but that's likely to be an element more meant for use of the facility in response to, let's say, a massive but survivable hurricane or a major earthquake. If the US government...
What would you do? What would you do if you were part of that high-level team and you were a staff member and they said, right, I want you to come with me, and you were like, well, okay, well, that means my family can't come with me. What would you do? Would you go with your family, or would you stay? Or would you stay? Because that's basically you're saying I'm going to survive. My life will be survive,
I lose everything.
But I lose everything. I lose my family. The thought of that, I couldn't do it, mate. There's no way I could do it. I would back with my family. There's no way I could do that. Not on your own like that.
It depends how many holiday you get a year. You gotta weigh it all up.
Do I get to go on putting green?
That's it. Let me just But
that's a hard choice, isn't it?
It is.
That sign up to these big roles.
Because in theory, it all sounds great and it all goes swimmingly, and it's right. Now it's time for you to extract and come with us, and then all of a sudden you go, but I'm not sure really. The bus. I'll just go and ask wife if it's okay. But I don't like I say. And what are you going to be left with afterwards? Is it really worth hanging around for, or is it just go home, have a last cup of coffee? It's a thinker, isn't it?
Yeah.
In the comments below, please give us your ideas. What would you do?
What would you do? Because it could be at that point where you've already lost your family, And then what? Then what do you do? So
if it's already wiped out, if you live in a strategic place, that's probably,
What have you done to us, Amanda? having these sort of big
Made us
conversations.
Think for a start, I know.
It almost split my brain cell into two.
And this young man here, he's got more than one brain cell in there, hasn't he? He just keeps... I mean, I can't even see him reading it, so is it all stored in there? How many takes does these videos take?
I don't know.
I don't know, but there you go.
There you go. Anyway, it's a thinker. Let's keep going.
For the rest of your day, what would you do?
And intends to weather a nuclear war that'll destroy communications infrastructure nationwide and cause the collapse of American civilization, then journalists will become considerably less important to keep around. And finally, there's one last element to consider, making it to Mount Weather at all. With any luck, a large-scale nuclear exchange would be precipitated by a major warning sign. Perhaps the use of tactical nuclear warheads on a battlefield, or a public vow of nuclear attack, or a rapidly devolving diplomatic crisis. But in the event of a true surprise attack, one that doesn't leave enough time to transfer critical personnel to Mount Weather before an attack kicks off, then simply making it to the facility becomes a mad dash. Although the US has other bunker facilities at its disposal, including underneath the White House, it's unclear whether those facilities are enough to enable the long-term survival of the American administration if the worst happens. According to a quick search on Google Maps, a trip to Mount Weather involves a road journey of about 61 miles, and while that's a distance that motorcades could probably cover rather quickly if they don't have to worry about traffic laws, they'll also have to make that journey along routes that even we, in the public domain, can calculate with a reasonable degree of certainty. Far be it from us, though, to claim that there's no ultra-secret underground maglev or hyperloop that can ferry the president to Mount Weather in the span of 3 to 5 minutes, but we certainly don't know of one.
Helicopter.
What that means is
you wouldn't want to be up in an
from
helicopter,
Washington,
mate.
D.C. to Mount Weather
If EMP
would be of
hits.
ultimate importance for any nation trying to launch a large-scale nuclear attack on America. Far more important than targeting major cities and population centers is targeting command and control, taking out the decision makers in Washington and across the American defense apparatus in order to leave the country paralyzed. For a brief moment of time, a series of minutes measured in the tens at best, the President of the United States of America, the Vice Presidents, the leaders of Congress, the Presidential Cabinet, the Supreme Court, the Joint Chiefs of Staff, and many of the critical minds that America considers utterly indispensable for its survival will all be on one of just a few stretches of road that lead from Washington, D.C. to the Blue Ridge Mountains. We can only speculate, but we must speculate, that of all the territory of the United States of America, it will be those few hundred square miles that catch the absolute worst of a nuclear apocalypse. Those who survive the journey will preside over what remains of a shattered nation, but whether or not they survive will be of ultimate importance to whoever has chosen to bring America to its knees. And it's here that we find the true nature of Mount Weather. A bunker that may not be so secret anymore, but is nonetheless absolutely critical to America's survival. Of course, we here at Mega Projects remain very invested in the idea of there not being a nuclear apocalypse anytime soon, but if there is, it's Mount Weather that may become the most important place in America after the absolute worst comes to pass.
Well,
as I say, that would probably be a number one on the, where the missiles are going to land, isn't it? Because we know where it is, so we'll just point everything at that and the stretch of road.
We know where it all is.
Yeah.
Everybody knows everything these days. That's the problem. There's no secretive. We're not allowed to be secret anymore.
Even, do you remember back in the day, Laurel and Hardy sang about the Blue Ridge Mountains of Virginia? On the trail of the lonesome pine. That's how I know. But and obviously they must know to precisely within the second how long something is going to take to fly from Russia through space back down again and land. So work that out, and by the time that you detected it, if everybody else is panicking on that road, are you going to get there in under a couple of minutes? I truly doubt it.
No. Well, there you go. Fully, really interesting. Mount Weather.
Yes.
From its history of being a weather station to it being the biggest underground complex for survival.
That nobody knows about.
That nobody knows about.
No.
Amazing.
There you go.
Thanks, Amanda, again for your video suggestion or requests. Always interesting to know. And obviously this is a trio from Mega Projects. Shout out to Mega Projects.
Yes, he gave us a clue on the last one, and I forgot it already, but we'll be back.
Raven Rock, I think.
Raven Rock. Nice.
Until tomorrow, it will be me and him again. So,
you're stuck with us. Goodbye from him.